Shulman grew up in Chicago as the only son of Jewish immigrants. After winning a scholarship to the University of Chicago, Shulman studied philosophy and psychology. Once Shulman entered the Department of Education, he studied with Benjamin Bloom and Joseph Schwab. Shulman took a special interest in Schwab's studies that later translated to his own work on teacher knowledge, which stayed constant throughout his career. Shulman completed his bachelor in philosophy and a master's and PhD in educational psychology, preparing for his role as a scholar in the psychology of learning and teaching. Dr. Shulman's beginning academic experience was as a professor of educational psychology and medical education at Michigan State University from 1963 to 1982. During this time, Shulman studied medical decision-making as well as quality teaching in elementary and secondary schools. It was in 1982 that Dr. Shulman moved to Stanford University to take on the title of Professor of Education. In this role, Shulman's work focused on the improvement of teaching and the education of teachers. During this time, Dr. Shulman and his team developed a process for assessing teacher quality, leading to the development of the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards.
Well, let me make this connection between the going beyond the information given and the combination of the habituation, the routine, and the collective responsibility. Because I think they're both very germane to us as teachers. As Pam said about, oh my God, Pam, 25 years ago, my colleagues and I here at Stanford began designing and field testing what has become the National Board for Professional Teaching Standard Assessment, and actually the basis for the California PACT assessment for graduating teachers. And the real innovation there is we decided after a year and a half of assessment development that the only way with integrity to assess the quality of veteran teaching was through a teaching portfolio that teachers developed in their own classrooms. Highly structured, highly mentored, graded, as it were, by their peers, but a portfolio that occurred in their own teaching context. And I'll never forget the first time I ever gave a talk about it, and a guy came up to me, and he was then the director of teacher assessment for the state of Tennessee, a very able guy. And he said to me, Lee, I want to stop you before you waste too much more time with this. You can't use portfolios to evaluate the quality of teaching. I said, why not? He said, teachers cheat. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, they help each other out on their portfolios. They show each other their work and they get advice from one another. Teachers cheat. So I said to him, just a second, do you have a PhD? He said, yeah. I said, did you have a doctoral committee for your dissertation? He said, sure. I said, so who were the members of the committee? And he proceeds to name, some very well-known people in the field with great pride. And I said, well, they didn't help you with the dissertation, did they? They didn't. He said, oh no, I would hand them a chapter, they would edit it, give it back to me, I had to rewrite it. And I said, so you cheated. Oh, well, that doesn't count for them. Well, what do we end up doing? We ended up introducing into our protocol for what became the National Board the idea of what became National Board support groups. Anybody here from the National Board support group? Hi, how are you, Sandy Dean? Oh, one of my very favorite people in the world. I still remember that video that Judy did of you where you said you just had a National Board day. Yes. No, the whole notion that we've now learned in the research over the years that teachers who undertake national board certification will almost uniformly attest that the preparation for board certification, because of the way other teachers and they looked at each other's videos and their portfolio entries and their student work and everything, was the most powerful professional development they ever experienced in their lives. That was the idea. And so instead of teachers cheat, the idea was teachers learn from preparing for board certification. And the only thing that makes me sad, and which I think we learn from the example of the collective reciprocal responsibility that moves the health statistics of hospitals ahead, is that it shouldn't end with board certification. That this notion of being reciprocally responsible for the quality of one another's work, that if we teach in a school, we are all responsible for what goes on in our grade and in third grade and in fifth grade and in sixth grade, because they are students in the school and we are members of a teaching profession. And if we saw and learned that surgeons were ignoring the poor practice of other surgeons, we would get ticked off beyond belief. This, I think, is part of the more universal message.
In 1997, Dr. Shulman was named the 8th president of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, where the research broadened to the education of many professions such as law, engineering, nursing, and the clergy. Interestingly, Shulman and his team studied the character and quality of doctoral education across various fields. After retiring in 2008, Shulman transitioned to Professor Emeritus to Stanford University, working mostly in research of Jewish education. This work has been pivotal in the creation of the Consortium for Applied Studies in Jewish Education.
In his book, The Wisdom of Practice, Lee Shulman said, "After some 30 years of analyzing teaching, I've concluded that classroom teaching is perhaps the most complex, most challenging, and most demanding, subtle, nuanced, and frightening activity that our species has ever invented." He then went on to compare what classroom teachers do as even more extreme than the activities that a doctor might encounter in a hospital emergency room. The quote, though, gives us a glimpse of Lee Shulman's perspective of education. He understood it, he had experienced it, and I think most importantly, he still had a sense of humor about it. Shulman's philosophical and theoretical basis for education in general, and his philosophy of pedagogical content knowledge in particular, stems from a really wide variety of educational researchers and philosophers. The first, John Dewey, lent Shulman his pragmatic outlook on the training of new teachers. Dewey is a leading proponent of pragmatism, and he believed that learning and experience should be integrated. He emphasized that the learning process was at least as important as the subject matter being learned, and he encouraged curiosity in all of his students. Pragmatism follows these beliefs, and it states that ideas and theories should be weighed, and their value is based on the extent of their practical use. If you have an idea or a theory, then you should act on it by testing it in an actual, real human experience. If your idea or theory is successfully applied during that experience, then and only then can you consider your theory to be proven true. Next is Israel Scheffler, who was a professional philosopher with an interest in education, and he was also a strong influence on Shulman. Scheffler believed that philosophical ideas were not able to offer practical solutions to problems in education. He did believe that philosophy was important to education, but we needed to examine philosophical ideas for the implications that they make about education. When considering these ideas, our primary objective should be to improve our philosophical understanding of the educational issues that we have. To this end, he believed that teachers should be actively engaged in the rational reflection of philosophical arguments and assumptions that exist in the context of education. We should not be passive receivers of philosophical wisdom that experts pass on to us. Being actively engaged in that philosophical reflection, teachers should be willing and able to explain what they believe to be true to their students and able to explain the reasons for believing it. If our students accept our belief, then they have to accept them on the basis of the reasoning that we're providing to them. Doing that, though, we also have to be open to our students challenging our reasoning and our beliefs and allow our students to assess our arguments that we present to them. Scheffler stated that teachers are just too preoccupied with the skills and the techniques that it takes to be a teacher, and we need to be pushed towards being more concerned about the attitudes that our teaching should be revealing in ourselves and our students. Shulman, by the way, was in complete agreement with this philosophical viewpoint. Next up is Thomas Green, another philosopher. His idea was to try and clarify exactly what the construct of teaching is. This is also a construct and idea that Shulman attempts to define in his philosophy. Green had this mental map or mental image of the concept of teaching, and that image really revealed a vagueness about the idea of teaching that made it very difficult to define and almost impossible to determine where one set of ideas or one set of skills ends and the next set of ideas and skills begins. These boundaries aren't clear, they overlap each other, they connect, and therefore it's not possible to describe the entirety of the construct of teaching. Instead, Green said, we can dissect pieces of teaching and describe those discrete pieces. Within the descriptions, though, we have to include the way those pieces relate to each other. Green also postulated that teaching was not just an activity, but a family of activities, where depending on what you're doing, different members of that family become more important and less important. In view of teacher education, training in Green's philosophy is not equivalent to teaching. Training is not equivalent to teaching, but training is part of the process of teaching. So it's one of the members of the family. Instruction also is not equivalent to teaching, but again, is part of it. He believed that the greater purpose of teaching is to lead students from the subjective beliefs and knowledge that they bring with them to school and into the classroom to more objective beliefs and knowledge of the world of academia. Gary Fenstermacher is next. He pulled together ideas from Scheffler and ideas from Green, and he blended those into kind of an overall set of ideas about educational research. He said that when educational researchers draw on the philosophical ideas of science to assist and inform their research, they're really looking for guidance from that philosophy in order to improve the current status of education, but mostly to improve the activities or behaviors within education and of educators. He said, though philosophical thought and ideas are not meant to change behavior, but rather to transform the nature of something. So educational researchers aren't utilizing philosophy to transform the nature of education itself. They're just trying to change the behavior of the educators. He also said that the philosophies of science in general really can't add to our understanding of what it means to do research regarding education, and that we really needed to be looking towards the philosophies within social sciences to fit that need a little better. Next, we have B.O. Smith. And his major contribution to Shulman's philosophy was really more in the structure of teaching colleges. He noted that colleges of pedagogy or teaching colleges, they're really divided in purpose between graduate level requirements of developing research scholars and the demands of the public school system for efficient and capable personnel. And that split personality of purpose really means that the net result is that neither one of those two goals is being realized. And it wasn't being realized in 1980, and what we're seeing is that it's still not being realized in 2017. Okay, we have now Joseph Schwab and Jean Piaget. Of course, we have Jean Piaget. Everything in education comes back to him. Joseph Schwab, first of all, he is a major contributor to a school reform movement in biology that happened in the 1960s. Part of that reform movement, he coined the term educational scientific inquiry. He is the founder of this concept and this belief system in how to teach children science. He believed that children should be taught science the same way that scientists do science. And since scientists do science through inquiry, then children should be taught science through inquiry. This idea, right alongside with the methodologies of Jean Piaget, really put a capstone on Shulman's philosophy. Piaget discovered that we can learn the most about how young children learn by careful observation of them during various activities and in various learning environments. The same can be applied to new teachers. We're going to learn best how and what our new teachers need to know to be an effective educator. First, through the inquiry process, putting that new educator into a learning activity, because if they're not discovering it through inquiry, then they're not really learning. Secondly, through careful observation by that lead instructor. Educational research can best be informed about how to transform the nature of education and the nature of training of new teachers by careful observation of our newest teachers in all of their failures and in all of their successes.
In 1986, Shulman published his research on teaching, which analyzed why the field of education had shifted from content-driven to pedagogically driven. This shift, he claimed, left education missing serious direction and focused instead on how teachers manage their classrooms, organize activities, allocate time in turns, and a plethora of other matters, while entirely omitting questions about content. His research program proposed to answer not only why this shift occurred, but also propositioned what we needed to do in order to put knowledge, content, back in teaching. The problem with modern education is encapsulated in this short and accurate, yet famous quote of Shaw's. Shulman is very purposeful in using this reference to Shaw, knowing that before he can suggest a solution to what is currently lacking in the field of educational content expertise, he must first set the foundation of what quantified an educational expert using historical precedents. He begins by describing the California State Board exam from 1875 that was required for all elementary school teachers. The exam covered 20 topics, including physiology, penmanship, mental arithmetic, school law of California, industrial drawing, and written grammar. The exam itself consisted of a series of essays that tested the intended educator's knowledge of school content and content-based questions, which comprised 90 to 95% of all essay questions asked. It was evident, according to Shulman, that the original standard to be a teacher focused on subject matter, and if one was to become a teacher, they must first be an expert of the content they intended to teach. Shulman goes on to compare the original standards to become an educator with today's modern ones. His criticism for teachers' assessment of the 80s centered around the idea that they measure the capacity of a teacher's effectiveness at teaching. The problem, as he sees it, is that the capacity measured generalizes the educator's ability regarding content knowledge and instead substitute one's ability to organize, prepare lessons, manage classrooms, and the like. Though educational procedure is important, Without first the ability to grasp the breadth and depth of one's content, how can a teacher be informed enough to teach? Shulman directly calls out Shaw when rejecting his statement with a more Aristotelian one of his own. Those who can, do. Those who understand, teach. To make this argument further and continue to lay the ground for knowledge and growth in teaching, Shulman points out that the university degrees and the rituals associated with them set precedents for the highest academic titles one can earn. The very definition of master and doctor, or dottori, means teacher. Thus, the highest university degree enabled its recipient to be called a teacher. How cool is that? This practice of awarding one with the ability to become a teacher is rooted in the work of Aristotle. The question yet remains, what is missing in the realm of education that can help us get back to a prolific understanding of our content? Shulman's Knowledge, Growth, and Teaching is the research program that addresses just that. The research itself focuses on secondary teachers in California who teach in core content areas such as biology, math, literature, and social studies. Each teacher is certified and considered highly qualified, having a bachelor's degree that reflects their subject areas being taught, and are in their first or second year of teaching. Data is collected using interviews by conducting observations and engaging teachers in data as it relates back to their educational preparatory programs. Immediately, an identified gap regarding content instruction is identified by Shulman and his team, where novice teachers are expected to teach on content that they themselves are not proficient with. This standard, flawed expectation is fairly common, as Shulman describes that literature teachers who are required to teach novels they themselves have never read, or social study teachers teach on places they have never experienced or studied, and math teachers teach an entire subject area that may not be in their major area of understanding. The research culminates with the understanding that three things are absent from programs set to produce educators. Shulman reasons that teacher prep programs must strive to prepare future teachers with subject matter content knowledge, pedagogical content knowledge, and curricular knowledge. In regard to content, we fully understand that this means the teacher is an expert in their field. However, Shulman points out we tend to overlook that a teacher needs to be knowledgeable in all of their students' content areas, which he defines as curricular knowledge. He proposes curricular knowledge as a necessity in order for teachers to provide cross-curricular and real-world practicality to students who are asked to accomplish tasks inside of and outside of class. The teacher's ability to relate the content of a given course to topics and issues being discussed simultaneously in other classes is imperative in order to help students connect the dots in their own learning. But none of this is feasible without pedagogical knowledge, which is the understanding a teacher has in regards to knowledge transfer. In other words, pedagogy is the means in which content becomes approachable and understandable by the student. Now, if any of you are familiar with the children's book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, you'll realize that Shulman is the mouse protagonist and his cookie is education. This is most appropriate in the culmination of his research does not end with the plan to overhaul the university's educational programs. Instead, he suggests we need to further study knowledge itself, suggesting that there are three kinds of knowledge, three sources of knowledge about teaching, three types of propositional knowledge about teaching, and until all these sets of three are defined and understood, we cannot yet ratify the new educational paradigm shift to produce the modern prepared teacher. There is much more to be done before we can begin the work of shaping programs that shape our teachers.